Hey guys, it's the Metal 5, and I imagine that this is going to be a pretty controversial video, but this is about something that's rubbed me the wrong way for a couple of years now. I swear I must have revised the title about a dozen times to make sure it's not misleading, but what I mean by an updated game release is when a game gets released, and later down the road they release an updated version of the game that includes more content or all of the original game's DLC. I don't have an issue with updated games in general, but the way they are sometimes handled really bugs me, and I've seen this occurring more frequently over time. So to give you an understanding of what this issue I have is, I'll give you the story of the first time I had exposure to an updated game that I had this issue with, and in turn where this issue stems from. Back in 2015, I got Mortal Kombat X, and as anybody who's familiar with NetherRealm Studios would know, they have a lot of DLC fighters in their games. So I purchased Combat Pack 1 to get all of the first set of DLC characters, as with fighting games I usually like to have every character possible, and even bought one or two of the costume packs with spare cash. Then when the Combat Pack 2 got announced, I waited for the moment when I could buy it just for completion's sake, even though only two of its characters interested me. But then later down the road they announced Mortal Kombat XL, an updated version of the game which included all of the DLC, and even some content exclusive to that version, like the pit stage and stage fatalities. Upon learning about XL, I immediately felt like I wasted my money. I thought, what was the point of me getting the game and spending all that money on the DLC when I could have just waited for XL and gotten all of that and more for a smaller price? The original Mortal Kombat X wasn't even a year old by the time XL released, which further pushed the idea. Sure, I could have bought XL, but I didn't feel like spending money on top of how much I already spent on the original. So when XL released alongside Combat Pack 2, I still bought the pack because the alien alone was enough of a selling point, but honestly, I hardly touched it. Shortly after that point, I completely gave up on X, which is a bit overdramatic, but I felt there wasn't much point in me playing a clearly inferior version of the game. Granted, they did release an XL pack that basically turned X into XL for people who didn't own XL, but for me, this would have meant paying more money, including for the DLC I had already purchased, and they didn't do this until over 6 months after XL's release. So long, in fact, that I didn't even know about it until recently. The XL situation significantly impacted my view of updated game releases, so much so that I always have reservations on getting most fighting games I'm interested in because I know they'll likely release an updated version later down the road. I even considered skipping Mortal Kombat 11 for that very reason, but I got it anyway because it looked really fun. I'm my own worst enemy sometimes. Now I just have to wait for history to repeat itself when they announce Mortal Kombat 11 complete with a K edition, or whatever they'll call it. Now here's something very important I need to stress. I have no issue with updated games that are released on a different console to the original, where they are more so ports. There, I think it's very good and makes a lot of sense because if they just release the same original game on a different console and force you to buy the DLC that they had already developed for that original version, I think that would be very redundant and greedy on the developer's part. An example of this is the many Switch ports like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, which included all the DLC from their originals, and as for all their new content, especially in the case of ports that only added new content like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, them being released on a different console kind of removes the question of why couldn't they have included this in the original game. And obviously ports are an easy way to allow people who never got a chance to play the original simply because they didn't own the console it was released on. An example relevant to me is Tales of Vesperia Definitive Edition, which added all the content specific to the Japanese exclusive PS3 version. I never had a chance to play the original since I don't have an Xbox 360, but the Definitive Edition did give me that chance, and my interest in trying out a Tales of game led me to getting it. Now I just need to get back to playing it. Additionally, there's the upcoming Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy of the Duelist Link Evolution, which is a Switch port that adds a full Arc 5 campaign, more cards, and Link summoning that gives me an incentive to get the game when I already have the original. All of this also applies to games that get remastered versions for the next console generation, such as Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD. My issue, like with Mortal Kombat XL, is when the updated game gets released on the same console as the original, because that's when I really get the feeling of, what was the point when I could have just waited for this version? It honestly feels like a dick move towards the people that actively supported the original game. Granted, in the past, there wasn't really anything else they could do, like with Capcom releasing the 5,000 different versions of Street Fighter 2, but nowadays, with DLC and updates being a thing, I feel like they could just do that without any need to release an updated version, and they'd still make money. Like how Capcom also released a bunch of versions of Street Fighter 4, when all that added stuff could have just been DLC. But they significantly improved on this with Street Fighter V, where, upon the release of the Arcade Edition, owners of the original game received a free update to convert it into the Arcade Edition on the same day. I wish more games did that kind of thing. Another game that I think handled this area well is Injustice 2, where the Standard, Digital Deluxe, and Ultimate Editions of the game were released simultaneously, and buying the Ultimate Edition meant that, aside from some cosmetic stuff, you paid a bit of extra money to be able to download all the DLC characters for free when they came out. That way, I feel it's far more up to the consumer's choice of which version they want, and in turn, how much content they intend to get for that game, rather than being forced to buy the original version if they really want it, and don't want to wait only to get smacked in the face by an updated version later. Hell, even Jump Force did this! Now, I am aware that the whole just make a DLC or an update thing only really applies to fighting games, as with other genres it isn't that simple. However, it still really bugs me when I see a game of any genre get an updated version sometime after the original on the same console. This leads me to the game that pretty much sparked me into making this video. Persona 5 Royal. I know a lot of people already expected this ever since those Atlas copyrighted abbreviations surfaced, but I always hoped they wouldn't do this, just so I wouldn't have a repeat of the Mortal Kombat XL situation. So when the game got officially announced and confirmed to be an enhanced version of Persona 5 with more stuff, it felt like the almost 300 hours I put into Persona 5 was a waste of time. I'll probably end up getting Royal when it comes out anyway, just to experience all the new stuff, which means that I'll be playing Persona 5 a third time.
Oh shit, here we go again.
But I do feel saddened by the fact that I spent so much time on the original, only for Atlas to later release what is definitively the far superior version of the game because of all that's been added. There's new game mechanics, new locations, a new social link, a third semester which wasn't in the original game with a new palace to boot, and a new party member. Granted, they did a similar thing with Persona 3 and 4, but in those cases, I think they did it much better. With Persona 3 FES, both it and the original were PS2 games, so they couldn't do anything like DLC or updates at the time. Persona 3 Portable was released for the PSP, so it was on a different console, and Persona 4 Golden was released for the PS Vita compared to the original being on the PS2. But with Royal, it is being released on the PS4 just like the original. I guess if you got the PS3 version of Persona 5 and only got a PS4 between then and now, it wouldn't be as big of an issue, but I think the vast majority of people bought the PS4 version anyway. The original Persona 5 is essentially an incomplete game compared to Royal, which makes me think, what was the point in me getting this game? And I can't help but be a little disappointed whenever I think about Royal. Not because of the game itself, but rather the circumstances around it. And I know Atlas can make updated versions of their games with the approach that I personally prefer, just look at Catherine Full Body. So part of me wishes that they could have done the same thing for Royal. So that's my whole issue I have surrounding the topic of updated or enhanced versions of games. Again, I imagine that a lot of people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine, but I really felt like getting this off my chest because it had been really bugging me a lot lately. Just to reiterate, I have no issue with updated games where the updated version is released on a different or next generation console to the original, or if it follows the Injustice 2 approach. But when it gets released on the same console as the original, that's where I get the feeling that the people who bought the original are getting kind of cheated. Of course, game companies are still businesses at the end of the day, and they do need to make money. But I think that there are other ways the situation can be tackled in which companies can still make money. Maybe I'm just overreacting, but that's how I honestly feel.